Okay, good evening, everybody. My name is Lawrence Walsh. I'm the chair of this planning committee. I'll just introduce everybody. On my right is Councillor Aidan Williams, the vice chair. On my left are senior planning officers. On my further right are officers from legal, highways and democratic services. Down both legs of the table are members of council who make up this planning committee. I'll just give you a fire safety notice before we start. I'd just like to convey a fire safety advice for this evening. If the fire alarm or continuous siren sounds, please could I ask that you leave the building in a calm manner by the nearest fire exit by proceeding left out of the room and down the main stairwell and out of the main civic entrance, which is opposite. Everyone should assemble at the front of the town hall and must not re-enter the building until instructed to do so. If you have a disability which could affect your means of escape, could you please inform a member of staff so that arrangements can be made for your safe evacuation. And we've got some broadcast information. Please be aware that this meeting will be recorded live and for subsequent broadcast on the council's YouTube channel. The whole of the meeting will be recorded except where there are confidential or exempt items. This activity promotes democratic engagement in accordance with Section 100A of the Local Government Act 1972. The cameras will focus on the proceedings of the meeting and avoid areas specifically designated for members of the public. If you object to being filmed, please remain seated in the public seating area. All members and officers must use the microphones provided to enable the audio to be picked up by the system. Members are reminded to turn off their microphones when they are not formally addressing the committee. So go to agenda item number 1, that's attendances. And I've got apologies from Councillor Patel, but apart from that, it's a full house. And item number 2 is declarations of interest. Members to give notice of any personal or prejudicial interest and the nature of that interest relating to any item on the agenda in accordance with the adopted code of conduct. Anybody want to declare any interest? Okay. And number 3 is the minutes to receive and if so determined to approve as a correct record of the minutes of the meeting held on the 14th of March 2019. Would anybody like to move the minutes as a true correct
Chairman.
record? Thank you, Councillor Bunting. Item number 4 is questions from members of the public. There have been no questions from members of the public received for this meeting. Item number 5 is the additional information report. To consider a report of from the head of planning and development to be tabled at the meeting. Information, they're on the table at the front. Item number 6 is applications to develop. And just a quick reminder to members of the planning committee, myself included, that as well as our local knowledge, we look to our local development plan and other background papers listed at the beginning of agenda item 6 as a basis for our decision making this evening. So we'll go to the first item, and that is page 1, which is 31 Ibrook Road in Bowden. And we have a speaker for this item, Dr. Alvey. Dr. Alvey, if you'd like to take a seat. Just take your time. Just make yourself comfortable, Mr. Alvin. Before you begin, I'm just going to have Miss Coley, our head of planning, is going to give us some advice. Miss Coley.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm just going to introduce this item, if I may. The application relates to a site on Ibrook Road, currently occupied by a vacant detached 2-storey dwelling. It's proposed to erect a pair of semi-detached dwellings with accommodation over 3 floors, together with associated access, parking and landscaping. The proposal has been called into committee by Councillor Sean Anstey, and letters of objection have been received from 7 different neighbouring addresses. The key considerations relate to the supply of housing and the impact on visual and residential amenity. The proposal contributes towards meeting the Council's housing land targets and identified housing need through the delivery of an additional family dwelling on a brownfield site. Appropriate revisions have been made to the scheme, and the proposed development is now considered to be acceptable in terms of its design and on the neighbouring residential properties. The proposal is considered to be acceptable in parking and highways terms. The application is therefore recommended for approval, subject to appropriate conditions. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Ms. Coley. Mr. Alvey, you have 3 minutes if you'd like to switch your microphone on.
Oh, okay. Sorry. Well, thank you. I'm humbled by the powerless sitting in front of the powerful. Just to let you know, I especially come back from this committee meeting yesterday from Southern Africa, where I was on humanitarian work. Just to give you a background with this application, there's already extent planning permission for a pair of semis. This application was just a revision primarily. I've sat in front of this committee many a time observing what they actually do, and I've been pretty impressed. They mention site visits and they read the reports diligently. But I'm not going into the aspects of the actual application itself. I think it speaks for itself and it has an approval. The main thing was it was called in by a councillor, and I actually arranged a meeting with the councillor, and I was very surprised when he said, well, he didn't know anything about the application. So when I put it to him, he said another councillor had asked him to call it in because he was going away on holiday. And when we actually had a meeting, he said he knew nothing about the application. But then as we were leaving the meeting, he said he'd consult Joanne Egley, who was actually the planner on the application. I never mentioned her name. Obviously, the councillor objected, called it in, but there's nobody here to speak against it. They're not here to sit here and convince you guys of their conviction. It's very easy just to put it forward. And there were 6 objections. Of course, people are allowed to object, but again, nobody's here. But some of these objections were really, really personal. For example, I'll point out, surprised that one elderly lady, and I quote, should need so much property to live in. I've actually on crutches because I literally broke my leg over this application taking a photograph and fell off a 3-meter height. I stand by the strength of the convictions for this application, and I think it speaks for itself. 16 and 21, sorry, I've gone off track. I'm actually speaking from the heart, like rehearsing, like most people sit here and do. I made a couple of points, but unfortunately this application has dragged on since last year, May. And I think because of political influence, there's been various iterations. It's supposed to go to committee in January. It was pulled at the 12th. It's come to committee now, for which I've attended. So I leave it at your discretion and your knowledge to carry on. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Alvey. If you'd like to return to your seat. Okay, would any members like to comment on this application? Councillor Wetton.
Looking at this, I'm seeing a good development. Right. Looking at this, I'm seeing a good development and a very impressive design that I'm sure will fit well into onto that site, and certainly will be better than what's there at the moment. I'm not impressed by some of the representations that have been made. They're poor value and they don't add anything to the debate. I am mindful that there is an approval already for the erection of 2 replacement dwelling houses on there. So this is a variation of that theme, but in its own right, I think it's fine, and I'm very happy to move the officer's recommendation.
Thank you, Councillor Wetton. Councillor Dr. Barclay.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm going to be supporting my colleague, Councillor Wetton, who's really said everything that I wanted to say. I mean, the site itself is very neglected now. It needs improvement, and I think the application before us fits in perfectly. I think it'd be a fantastic improvement. I can't really understand the nature of the objections. None of them really add up in terms of planning conditions that would make me worried about what you're proposing. I think that the development is really good development. I look forward to seeing it being built. So I'm very happy to second the recommendation for approval. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Barclay. Councillor Bunting.
Thank you, Chairman. Nothing much to say on the application itself, other than the fact that I agree with everything that the two previous councillors have just said, and that I'll be voting in favour of the recommendation also. The only point I wanted to raise was, yes, I'm aware that it was Councillor Anstey who called the application in on behalf of Councillor Hyman, as Councillor Hyman was going away. Why Councillor Hyman isn't here, I can't say, but simply to assure the member of the public that the fact that Councillor Hyman is absent from tonight's meeting does not mean that this committee will not deal with his application in exactly the same way. All the objections are noted down, and so therefore the fact that Councillor Hyman isn't here to speak doesn't actually prevent the process from going ahead. I just wanted to say that just to reassure the member of the public that everything is being dealt with according to the rules. And with that, Chairman, I have nothing further to say. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Bunting. Councillor Longden.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I know the site, and I think what's being proposed, when I look at the representations, I disagree with them strongly. I think what we've seen from the drawings, I think they're perfectly in proportion. Yes, smaller compared to some of the other properties on the roads, but perfectly acceptable and look actually like good properties and a good use of the space. I'm just disappointed that we have nobody turning up from the councillors to provide the representations. And as far as I'm concerned, it's wasting everybody's time.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Longden. It's been moved. Has it been seconded that we grant this application? Dr. Barclay's moved, seconded it. Okay, it's been moved and seconded that we grant this application. All those in favour, please show. And those against? That is unanimous. The application has been approved. Thank you, Mr. Elvey. Okay, we're going to go to page number 19. That's land at Heath Farm, Partington. And we have our old friend, Mr. Scott, who's going to speak to us. But before he does, I think we're going to get some advice from Miss Coley. Thank you.
This application relates to the site of the former Partington Gasworks in Partington and 2 adjacent parcels of land on Broadway. The application is for up to 600 dwellings and seeks full planning permission for 148 dwellings and outline planning permission for up to 452 dwellings. The application is accompanied by an environmental statement that has assessed the likely significant environmental effects of the proposed development. 10 letters of objection and 1 letter of support have been received, with the main issues raised being poor transport infrastructure and additional traffic, inadequate public transport, lack of local facilities, impact on mossland, wildlife and bird species, contamination and health risks, air pollution and increased flooding. The site is within the Carrington strategic location, an area identified for 1,560 new dwellings, employment development and supporting infrastructure. The principle of residential development in this location is acceptable and will contribute significantly towards addressing the identified housing land supply shortfall in the borough. In terms of layout and design, the proposal is considered appropriate to its location and will deliver a high-quality scheme with significant new areas of public open space, woodland and tree planting, and children's play areas. The impact on the surrounding highway network has been carefully considered. To mitigate the impact of the initial phases of the development, an improvement to Manchester Road eastbound approach to the Flixton Road Isherwood Junction in Carrington is proposed, which would be secured through a Section 106 agreement. Thereafter, a further improvement is required to mitigate the impact of the full development. This would comprise either the Carrington Relief Road, or in the event the Relief Road doesn't come forward, a further improvement to Manchester Road. Both these schemes would require a future application for planning permission. However, the local highway authority is satisfied that these improvements and trigger points for their implementation would mitigate the impact of the proposed development on the public highway. The report acknowledges that Partington is not currently considered a sustainable location, and specifically that there are insufficient primary school places in Partington to accommodate the demand generated by the development. These are identified as adverse impacts to be weighed in the planning balance. The proposal would result in the loss of existing woodland trees and hedges and disturbance to the habitats and species which these support. However, the proposals overall will result in a net gain in biodiversity with retention and management of woodland, provision of substantial new areas of open space, woodland, trees and hedgerows, wildflower meadow and wetland. The scheme will provide 100 affordable dwellings to be provided by Trafford Housing Trust with the benefit of a Homes England grant which will include shared ownership and rent-to-buy units. In the strategic locations, policy requires a level of affordable housing determined by a site-specific viability assessment up to 40%. The applicant's viability assessment seeks to demonstrate that no affordable housing over and above the 100 grant-funded units could be delivered. That assessment is not accepted by officers, and therefore the scheme does not deliver a policy compliance level of affordable housing. Nevertheless, it is considered that the benefits of 100 affordable units being provided outweighs the alternative of a lower level of affordable housing shown to be viable, which the applicant has advised would be instead of, rather than in addition to, the 100 grant-funded affordable units. Future phases of development would be subject to a viability review to assess whether further affordable units can be delivered in future phases. The planning balance section of the officer report makes it clear that in relation to paragraph 11 of the MPPF, there is no clear reason for refusing the development proposed, and the benefits of the scheme are considered to significantly and demonstrably outweigh the adverse impacts. The application of paragraph 11D is an important material consideration which should be given significant weight and justifies the departures from development plan policy identified in the officer report. No other material considerations have been identified which would warrant a different view being taken. The application is therefore recommended for approval, subject to a Section 106 legal agreement and a set of conditions. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Ms Coley. Mr Scott, you have 3 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Walsh. For those of you who don't know me, my name's Graham Scott and I'm the Development Director of Trafford Housing Trust. And today I'm here to speak on behalf of the team who have put this planning application before you. The development is planned to be delivered through a joint venture approach between Trafford Housing Trust and Galliford Try. And in creating the development, we've worked closely with the local community, stakeholders, residents, local councillors and the council itself. And we believe that we have managed to hone their views into an excellent development which will help benefit Partington and actually create a new valuable neighbourhood for that area and the people who live within Trafford. As most people are aware, the development's on a brownfield site, which we know to be contaminated and has caused some concern with local residents through anti-storm that area and create much needed homes. And as Rebecca has talked tonight, in the first phase, we'll be providing 50% affordable homes, which is 74 of the first 148. In terms of those affordable homes, Trafford Housing Trust will keep those affordable homes and manage them either whether they're shared ownership or rented, and therefore be able to ensure that there's a long-lasting legacy and the sense of community within the area. We understand the traffic issues within the area, and as Rebecca has said, we've done a number of detailed studies and agreed a mitigation process to ensure we don't put further impact on the current and existing transport networks. We've included within our development protected open space, and we've looked at the biodiversity issues. We're contributing to sports facilities, and therefore it contributes to the overall community within the local area. We've also been working hard to resolve the technical issues with the site and ensure that there's a robust development in front of Planning Committee tonight. I would like to suggest this is a carefully thought out development which has been designed to meet the specific needs of Partington and Trafford. And this is by far the largest development that Trafford Housing Trust has been involved in to date, but one we're keen to continue with, and one we would like to be known for within Trafford. And this is the type of regeneration project we are keen to work with Trafford Council on in the future. And in delivering developments at this size and this scale within Trafford, this will help contribute to the housing crisis and solve the housing problems that we've got within the borough. We believe that the strength and local knowledge of Trafford Housing Trust, combined with the technical and construction skills of Galliford Try, will deliver an excellent high-quality development that people want to live in. If this is approved tonight, our aim is to start construction as soon as possible and deliver on this site as we do with all our schemes, and we hope Planning Committee has recognised in the past. He Farm Lane will be a hugely positive step forward for Partington, creating new affordable homes for local people and improving the area in terms of open space, housing, facilities and traffic improvements. Therefore, we'd ask for your support tonight.
Thank you, Mr. Scott. If you'd like to return to your seat. Would anybody like to open the debate? Councillor Wetton.
Thank you, Chairman. Obviously, it's a big scheme. It's an impressive scheme, and I think there's every scope for this scheme to make a substantial contribution to the viability of Partington, which I think is an important side effect to actually creating a lot of new homes for a lot of people. There would be, this once this scheme were to be completed, this would be a huge boost to the local economy, to the shops and leisure and jobs. But the key element is much needed new homes, and it delivers very effectively, to my mind, in that respect. It's good use of this site. After all, creating homes out of what was a gasworks is a great step forward. If anything, I'm concerned about the capacity of the primary schools, and clearly that is an issue that's got to be addressed at some point. Pressure would come from this scheme, but not this scheme alone. I know we're only considering this scheme, but there is pressure building on capacity of primary schools that will need to be addressed. Equally, there's pressure on building on traffic issues, and they're going to need to be addressed in parallel with the other nearby schemes that will be going ahead. Whilst I'm supportive of the scheme and very happy to move the recommendation, I just want to finish by saying I don't actually understand where the toing and froing of the affordable housing debate is up to. And I would just ask in conclusion, perhaps Mrs. Coley could shed a little bit of light on that. I know she did cover it in her speech, and I know Mr. Scott mentioned it, but with what's been said and what's in the reports and the late reports, I would like a bit of clarification on that, please. But I do move the recommendation.
Thank you, Councillor Wetton. Ms. Coley, would you like to comment?
Yes, certainly. Thank you, Chair. It's slightly different on this scheme as it would be on others, basically because of the identity of the applicant and the fact that it's a joint venture between Trafford Housing Trust and Galliford Try. And as Trafford Housing Trust are a registered provider, they're able to draw down grant funding from Homes England to provide affordable homes, which a developer who wasn't a registered provider wouldn't be able to do. So Galliford Try couldn't do that on their own. However, we still have to test the viability of a scheme, whether it's produced by a registered provider or not, and we've done so. And the developer's first viability assessment set out that they couldn't provide any affordable housing at all on an assessment of overall scheme viability, notwithstanding the 100 grant-funded homes. Our viability consultant didn't agree with the conclusions of that assessment and asked them to revisit. Some sensitivity testing was carried out, and another number of other options were looked at, and we got to a position where the applicant offered us 5% affordable housing, but then said it's either the 5% affordable housing across the whole scheme or the 100 grant units and a viability review, or you refuse it. So we had to consider at that point the entire balance, what position on affordable housing is most beneficial, or does it weigh strongly enough in the planning balance that we should refuse the scheme? And our view was the benefits of the 100 grant funded units outweighed any benefits of either 5% and outweighed the scheme not going ahead at all, because what the 100 grant unit allows is, firstly, they come forward in the majority of them in the first two phases of the scheme, so they're delivered early, whereas the 5% affordable would have been delivered at any point within the scheme. There's also the viability reviews, so we could get more across the scheme, and there's also the possibility that more grant funding could be drawn down in later phases. So the likelihood of a significant amount of affordable housing being delivered from this scheme comes forward as a result of the grant funding. And on that basis, on balance, although we still think that the development could viably deliver more, the offer is 100 or 5 or nothing. We've opted in the balance for the 100. However, it's for members to consider whether that balance lies the same way as officers does. Thank you.
Are you happy with that, Councillor Wetton? Yeah. Okay. Anybody else? Councillor Williams.
Thank you, Chair. I suppose the first thing I'd say is that I'm pleased to see that the application is now being brought before committee, because it has been some time in the pipeline. I attended both of the public consultation events that were held in Partington by the developer, just in an effort to try and gauge some of the public opinion amongst the community. And it did seem to me that there was a general level of enthusiasm. There were well-attended public consultations, and people were speaking with an open mind and in a positive nature about the development. And I think the small number of objections that have been received by the planning department probably reflects that as well. I welcome the fact that the development's being built on a brownfield site. We talk all the time at this committee about the importance of a brownfield first approach to housing development, and it's nice for us to want to have an application before us where we can improve that. I'm pleased to see that the developer is going to be delivering affordable housing and in the first phase of the development, but I would just note, I think, my sense of disappointment that a Section 106 contribution was not made, despite the fact that the council's independent assessment of the viability statement provided by the developer suggests that one could have been made. I thank Councillor Wetton and also Ms Coley for touching on that and explaining the background work that was done there. It seems to me that we probably are where we are now, but I think reputationally, that sort of headline of social housing provider refuses to make a Section 106 contribution, it just doesn't strike me as being particularly impressive, but I suppose that's a matter for Trafford Housing Trust to reflect on now. My only other sort of area of concern really relates to the impact upon highways, and at those consultation events and also in the representations that are provided in the report. A number of members of the public did speak to that, because Carrington Lane and Manchester Road are already, I did read through the report, and it seemed to me that a lot of work has been done by the Highways Authority in trying to bring forward a robust set of conditions that could probably do as much to mitigate an adverse impact upon highways as possible. So on balance, I think I just have to defer to the advice that's been given in the report, and trust that as much has been done as possible to mitigate against that. So as Councillor Wetton has proposed, I'd be happy to second this officer's recommendation. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Williams. Anybody else? Councillor Bunting.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. I'm perhaps slightly more enthusiastic about this than the new Vice Chairman. I accept that the viability issue that's been gone through, but I also appreciate that there's a great deal of contaminated land there, which is somewhat pricey to clear up, and the fact that we're going to see this piece of mostly brownfield land sort of put back into use from its previous sort of industrial usage is more than welcome. This is a considerable number of homes. I think it's a good layout. I think it's a good setting. I think there are many other public benefits in terms of the woodland setting and what have you that have been included within it. I think this will be a major boost to the local economy, and I would regard that the positives from this application significantly outweigh the negatives. Yes, I appreciate it's about more social, more affordable housing, but given the costs of cleaning up contaminated industrial land, I think I can see where they're coming from in terms of viability. So maybe less surprised about that. As we've already pointed out, I think both Councillor Wetton and Councillor Williams have pointed out the sort of twin problems that do loom in the background: the highways issues and the school issues. Obviously, a lot of highways issues are already addressed within the report, and there probably maybe need to be some additional highway work as well. And I'm sure that our most excellent colleagues in education will be making the relevant plans in terms of additional primary schools, especially. I know we have a degree of capacity at the moment, and I think its first couple of phases will be okay with, and after that then there'll become pressure on the schools, and I'm sure at some point in the future we will get either an extension to an existing local school or additional school, depending upon which is deemed more appropriate. But on the whole, whilst I accept that there are problems, I think we are perhaps damning THT with faint praise over this one. I think it's a better scheme than perhaps has been alluded to, and I look forward to it being built. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Bunting. Councillor Carey.
Thank you, Chairman. I was born and raised in Partington, and it's absolutely amazing to see some organisations here that are willing to spend so much money on it. I was born in 1981, and there was nothing done there for many, many years, and it was great to see this council support the development of the town centre, which has gone on to be a real success. I think it's the most units in the whole of the borough in the town centre with the most capacity in them. I forgot the term, sorry. Yeah, less vacancy numbers. I can't remember the numbers, sorry. And it's great to see that this development will help secure those numbers and also improve them. Also, as a former maths teacher at Broadoak School, that school has had a massive turnaround in the last 10 years. It's gone from being a failing school to one of the most improved schools in the north, but it still struggles with its numbers. And as a high school, I think this will really improve its numbers based on this development. So I will be supporting this application. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Carey. Councillor Hobbs.
Thank you, Chair. This is an excellent, high-quality application. I'm really pleased to see it here this evening. And it does complement the nearby proposals that we've also seen as this committee in the past, covering the Carrington strategic area. As many of the objectors to this and some of the representations and previous speakers have said, traffic is the big issue here. Partington is not an easy place to get to. It does take a long time as it is now. If it's rush hour, it takes even longer. And I certainly hope that the relief road comes in on track to alleviate some of the extra traffic that will be caused by this and other developments. Though the other mitigating circumstances that have been, the other mitigating conditions that have been put in place, if that relief road doesn't come on track, I'm satisfied with them. There is a real need for housing in this borough, particularly affordable housing. The fact this is on brownfield land is absolutely excellent, and I hope this certainly go towards meeting the housing need. I also think it will enhance and transform Partington. There's one of the Councillor Wetton's mentioned the schools, as has Councillor Carey. There's an objection in here about no planned additional local shops. It does have 100% occupancy at the moment, but my belief is you build the houses. The people will move in, the shops and services will come because people to spend money, etc. So in conclusion, the positives heavily outweigh the negatives. Really pleased to see this. Get on and build it. Excellent.
Thank you, Councillor Hobbs. Dr. Barclay.
Thank you, Chairman. I just really wanted to say how attractive I thought the proposed development is. I think it looks a lovely place to live, and I think it's really exciting. It turns what was a very kind of ugly brownfield site into a site that is going to give lots of homes and a lovely, lovely place to live, as I said. So I'll be supporting the application.
Thank you, Councillor Dr. Barclay. Councillor Coggins.
Thank you. Yes, there's a lot of good things about the application. I had quite a few concerns, actually. Along with some of the others' concerns about the primary schools. Particular, it does say that it's likely the primary school age children will have to go out of borough for some time to access school. It's 4-year-olds in a non-sustainable location with poor bus services going out of borough. That's quite a big ask. Obviously, there's the question of the contamination. I found particularly some of page 257, sorry, paragraph 257 on page 108, where it talks about the major accident hazard zones, and that parts of it are in the middle zone, but unfortunately given that most of it is not in the middle zone, the health and safety executive, I think, say they don't advise against it. So I see that we can't turn it down on those grounds. And I suppose, as someone has commented opposite, I've forgotten who now, at the end of the day, these contaminated sites have to be decontaminated, and this is one way of doing that. I appreciate all the arguments about the affordable housing. I still don't understand why a robust viability assessment couldn't have been provided. Again, given that we're dealing with a provider of social housing. But also I was quite concerned about the loss of trees and hedgerows, a lot of mature trees to go. I understand that it says that there's a net increase in green infrastructure, not in terms of quantity, I think it said, but in terms of quality. And I noticed that this is given substantial weighting in the planning balance, and the related issue of the fact, page 99, paragraph 223, that's a locally important breeding site for birds, especially the red-listed lapwing and skylark, and what was the other one? The little red-winged plover, which is Schedule 1. Again, I can see that in planning terms, it seems to be, it has been awarded substantial weight, but on the opposite side of the balance, of course, we've got these 600 homes, 100 of which are affordable, and the affordables are early in the scheme. So I can see that it's quite a complicated one for me, but I'll continue to listen. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Coggins. Anybody else? Well, it's been moved and seconded that we grant this application. All those in favour of granting, please show. And those against? That is unanimous. Thank you. The application has been granted. Can I say, it is a big application, this, and we're aware of the importance of it. And what we've asked is that officers are going to come back to us maybe every 12 months or so. Development may well take 11 years. So we'd like to keep an eye on it, and we'll be keeping an eye on things, and so that we all realise how important it is, and for the members of the public, for their comfort as well. Thank you very much. Okay, we're going to go to page 151. That's the school development site, Audley Avenue in Stratford. There are no speakers to this item. Ms. Coley is going to give us some advice.
Thank you, Chairman. Just a quick introduction. The committee considered the application for the erection of a new SEN school at your previous meeting of the 8th of November, and then this item to change the resolution was deferred, I think, at the early March meeting. The November meeting resolved that you were minded to grant planning permission subject to the completion of the 106 agreement for a financial contribution towards off-site open space. Department for Education will need to enter into an agreement under section 111 of the Local Government Act 1972, as opposed to 106 agreement, which requires an amendment to the previous resolution of the committee to authorise the sums to be secured under that section 111 agreement. There have been no other material changes in planning circumstances since members were minded to grant consent, and the analysis in the officer's report from November 2018, the list of planning conditions to be imposed remains unaltered. Thank you, Chairman.
Okay, Councillor Bunting.
Thank you, Chairman. As it's just a change in legal status, so I've got nothing really to say on this application other than to simply move the officer recommendation. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Bunting. Anybody like to second that? Councillor Wetton, would you like to comment?
I don't think it needs any comment, really. So it's a formality, and I think we just need to see it built.
I think that's right, Councillor Wetton. Been moved and seconded that we grant this application. All those in favour, please show. Those against, it's unanimous. Thank you. I'm going to go to page 154. That's 89 Urban Road in Sale. Is there there any advice from officers? Sarah's going to give us some advice.
Thank you, Chair. This application relates to an end of terrace property positioned at the junction of Haddon Grove and Urban Road. The applicant proposes the erection of a ground floor single-storey side extension and a rear store replacing an existing shed. The application is presented to committee as the applicant is a member of council staff and there have been no objections. The proposal is considered acceptably designed with no harm to the character and appearance of the property or the street scene and with no harm to residential amenity. The application is therefore recommended for approval, subject to conditions. Thank you.
Thank you, Miss Lowe, not Sarah. I shouldn't be so familiar. Thank you for that. Councillor Bunting wishes to comment.
Thank you, Chairman. As before, very straightforward application, only here simply as a formality to somebody for procedural reasons because it's council member of staff. I've got nothing to say on this application other than to move the recommendation. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. It's also on a corner there, so there's a little bit more interest perhaps than would normally if it was just in the middle of the terrace. It's on a corner plot, so it's going to be well seen by everybody. I went to view and didn't have any issues with it today. Anybody like to comment? I'll second Councillor Bunting's proposal that we grant this application. All those in favour of granting, please show. Those against, that is unanimous. That has been granted. Thank you. Page 162, Longford Telephone Exchange, that's actually been withdrawn. We won't be discussing that tonight. I'll come back to us at a later date. And I think that concludes the planning applications. So we'll now go to agenda item 7. Compliance review of local development plan policy with the revised national policy framework, MPPF. Miss Lowe is going to give us some advice on that.
Thank you. Following the publication of the revised National Planning Policy Framework in July 2018 and a further update in February 2019, it's considered best practice to undertake a review of the local development plan policies to identify a level of consistency with the framework. This is to assist in applying the correct weight to the existing local development plan policies when determining planning applications. Members will note that this exercise has already been carried out in respect to relevant policies in individual committee reports. However, this report will give members an overview of all development plan policies and can be used as a background paper for decision making, enabling a simplified approach in individual committee reports going forward. The report identifies that a number of the policies within the development plan are not fully consistent with the MPPF, meaning less weight should be afforded to those elements of the policy that are considered out of date. The assessment summaries in Table 1 of the report provide further information on the aspects of these policies that are not considered to be fully consistent with national policy. When determining applications against any of these policies, regard should be had to the reasons why the policy is to be given less weight to ensure that the policies are used. To ensure that the use of policy is based on the and for those policies that are not consistent, policies in the 2019 MPPF should now be used. Councillor Walsh has asked if I run through some of the specific examples so we can understand exactly how this would work in practice. So if members could turn to Table 1, and the 7th page of the report relating to policy L1. So the review of this policy sets out that the policy generally doesn't accord with the MPPF insofar as the council doesn't presently have a 5-year housing land supply. As paragraph 11 clearly states of the MPPF, that where local planning authorities cannot demonstrate a 5-year supply of land, then it's out of date. So limited weight can be afforded to this part of the policy, and that the MPPF should be used instead as a strong material planning consideration. In addition, the methodology for setting out housing need used within this policy is not considered with that specified within the MPPF. The net homes per annum required using the MPPF methodology is considerably greater than that set out within policy L1. Again, limited weight should be afforded to this part of the policy, and applications for housing should be assessed in accordance with paragraph 11 of the NPPF. If we move to policy L4, which is on the next page, this is another one of the policies that is in part out of date and not consistent with the NPPF. There's the test for the impact on the highway network. Policy L4 states that the harm to the highway network should not have a significant adverse impact. The NPPF sets the bar a little higher in that it states that development should only be refused on highway grounds if impacts are considered severe. So given that higher bar set out in the NPPF, policy L4, when considering the residual cumulative impact on the highway network, is considered out of date, as it is in relation to the setting of maximum parking standards. L4 does not follow the methodology set out in the NPPF and therefore is considered out of date. Less weight should be afforded to these parts of the policies, and decision makers should use the relevant parts of the NPPF in considering planning applications. So members are recommended to note the contents of the report and the associated table. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms Lowes. Any comments? Councillor Bunting.
Just move we note the report, Chairman.
Thank you. Ms Lowes talked about L4, the one we just looked at, and so what we're saying that the policy that L4 is more complicated. It's not just one line, but there are parts that are not consistent. So when we're looking at our reports for planning application, whoever writes the report will allude to that. So we wouldn't be sticking to the policy that's out of date. We've recognised that it's out of date, and the NPPF would take over. And there will be a local development plan. Is that it? Local development coming to us perhaps within 2 years' time, which will sort out all those issues so that everything is up to date with the NPPF. Will copies of this be at the beginning of our agenda papers in future? Can I ask Ms Coley?
We're going to publish it on the website, and it'll be a background paper. We wouldn't necessarily provide it with every committee agenda, but that's something for members to request or not.
I think that the document we have before us is a useful reference point. Certainly, I'll be hanging on to it for the future. We do make decisions on policies. You know, that's what we're about, and so the policies are important, and that reference is important and useful for everybody. Councillor Coggins.
Just request if this is going to be the main copy we have access to. I see in the additional information it's all been updated. Do you think we could get circulated completely up to date so we can then just keep that as a reference? That'd be really. So I'm really glad this is here. I had as I read through these, I often think I wish they would do a chart of which ones are up to date, which ones aren't, and then you did. So it's great. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Coggins. Yes. I think that's fine. Yeah, we can do that for everybody. Thank you. Okay, that report is for noting. We're all happy with that. Thank you. Agenda item 8 is a stopping up notice at the Mount. Anybody got any comments on that one? Councillor Bunting.
Just move no objection, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Bunting. I went to view this today and I've got a bit confused, and of course I hadn't looked at the application. Of course, goes with it 93950, and once I looked at that, it made perfect sense to me. For our highways department, they were trying to explain it to me today, but it's only common sense, and I'm very happy with it. It's been moved. I'll second it for approval. All those in favour, please show. Those against, that is unanimous. And the last one, yes.
Could I just ask for confirmation that members have noted the point that what we're asking members to consider is the revised plan, which is in Plan A, not Plan B, please.
Was that circulated with the plan? It was, right. Okay. Everybody happy with that? Yeah. Okay. Agenda item 9. Thanks for that, Jeff. Agenda item 9 is a stopping up order at Sale on Sibson Road. Any comments on that application? Councillor Bunting.
Yeah, I've just got a very slight query, if I may, Chairman. It's probably me that's missed it. If I'm being dim-witted, I apologise. Obviously, in terms of the stopping up area that's noted, place like Springfield Road, that's fine because it's got the other end they can access. In terms of Friars Road, that's obviously a dead end. Yet they're stopping up the Simpson Road that leads to it. What's the situation regarding access to Friars? Because obviously I know it reasonably. I used to live there, and it's a dead end road, and the only access in is via Simpson. If you're going to stop that up as per the map, you're not going to be able to access Friars, are you? Oh,
Yeah, in terms of the stopping up, it's the section of Friars Road within the development, which was approved at the last planning committee. That is the only part of Friars Road which is closing. So the other side of Simpson Road is remaining open. Simpson Road will remain open in the main. It's just been narrowed. The width of Simpson Road has been narrowed down on the development side of the scheme. So therefore, the Friars Road section is just a small stub end, which is being stopped up, and not the other side.
yeah, I appreciate that the Friars Road, half of it, the houses demolished there many years ago. It was the other half. So where it shows the whole of the full width of Simpson Road being blocked up where you access Friars, it's only a part of it there.
Yeah, what it doesn't actually show on that scale of plan, it's showing the area what's going to be improved. So Simpson Road, there's some improvements on Simpson Road, if you may recall, at the last meeting. And all it's doing is that plan is identifying that there's improvements to Simpson Road and not stopping it up.
In that case, Chairman, I move no objection. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Bunting. Thank you, Mr. Evanson. Mr. Williamson is a previous highways officer for us. Anybody else like to comment? No. I'll second Councillor Bunting that we grant this application. Or it's not an application, Mr. Evanson, is it? All those in favour, please show. And those against, that is unanimous. Thank you. I think that's the end of the meeting. Thank you, everybody, and good night.